You have reached the 911 police emergency line. Due to defunding of the police department, we're sorry, but no one is here to take your call. If you're calling to report a rape, please press 1. To report a murder, press 2. To report a home invasion, press 3. For all other crimes, leave your name and number, and someone will get back to you. Our estimated wait time is currently 5 days. Goodbye.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
You go, big man. Well, this just in from CNN, guys. It's from a paper from 2 years ago now. But what we're talking about here is a rolling over and over and over that it won't let me pull the page down. It's just GIMP ruin. See if I can do it with this. You gotta love CNN. So, ancient Egyptians and their modern counterparts share less in common than you might think. That is, at least genetically, a team of scientists have found, and that's kind of the important denotion right there. Researchers from the University of Tübingen and the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History in Jena, both in Germany, have decoded the genome of the ancient Egyptians for the first time with unexpected results for some. Publishing its findings in Nature Communications, the study concluded that preserved remains found in ElMelek in Middle Egypt was closest genetic relatives of Neolithic and Bronze Age populations from the Near East, Anatolia, and Eastern Mediterranean, and Europeans. Modern Egyptians, by comparison, share much more DNA with SUB Saharan populations. The findings have turned years of theory of some people on its head, causing Egyptologists to reevaluate the region's history while unlocking new tools for the scientists working in the field. Depending on which way you see it, the ancient Egyptians have the privilege or ignominy of being one of the most investigated peoples in all of antiquity. Scientists have virtually undressed mummies, diagnosed from beyond the grave such things as smallpox and other ailments, but exposed miscarriages and even 3,000-year-old scams. I did a video on one where they were showing that they were making fake animal sacrifices for some people and stuff because they couldn't acquire them. Extracting genome data is a new frontier for Egyptologists, however, and it's a new frontier for all of the world. I've been studying it for years and years, and it got to the point where, seriously, people were arguing over pottery and whether or not people had developed new pottery, or if they were related to other people, or if they just traded with the other people, and no one was sure which people were exactly who. They did cranial studies and things like that and thought they had it all figured out, and they pretty much did. But of course, this just is a verifier. Scientists took 166 bone samples from 151 mummies, and from approximately 1400 BC to 400 AD, extracting DNA from 90 individuals and mapping the full genome in 3 cases. So they were able to get genetic data that was readable on 90 different mummies out of the area. It was pretty interesting sounding, because they've only gotten it from a few before this time. One was in the early 12th dynasty. They found a guy that's DNA, his name was Yehudi Nacht. He was U6, which is early European hunter-gatherers. But other than that, it's been rather difficult. Previous DNA analysis of mummies has been treated with a necessary dose of skepticism, explains Professor Johannes Krause of the Max Planck Institute. When you touch a bone, you probably leave more DNA on the bone that's inside of it, he argued. Contamination is a big issue. Only in the last 5 or 6 years has it become possible to actually study DNA from ancient humans, because now we can show whether DNA is ancient or not by its chemical properties. So, through the past, there's always been a lot of European DNA showing up in them whenever they would try to test it. But they didn't have a way of discerning of whether or not that was somebody who ruined it recently or somebody far in the past, or if it was actually their DNA. Now, common sense would tell you that after they test quite a few of them and they keep showing up it, and perhaps there's somebody not there in front of them that would have this same DNA, that would signify it. But once they develop this procedure here, it ensures that there's not a question about it. He tells you heat and high humidity in tombs paired with some of the chemicals involved with mummification all contribute to DNA degradation. The paper adds, but it describes the findings as the first reliable data set obtained from ancient Egyptians. Analyzing samples spanning over a millennium, researchers looked for genetic differences compared with Egyptians today, and they found the samples set showed a strong connection with a cluster of ancient non-African populations based east of the Mediterranean Sea. And as they described before, Anatolia and Caucasians and early Caucasian hunter-gatherer DNA and genetics is what it's showing. So what we used to call Cro-Magnon, but the people are still extant today. Something neat they found recently also with this same type technique is a 29,000-year-old Cro-Magnon man who, whenever they check their DNA, is still extant today. That person is still existing today. So that really threw everything on ahead there a little bit too. So when is this supposed magical mutating from people happens, and the out of Africa theory's been shattered long ago, but Krause describes the far-reaching data set contained from looking at mitochondrial genomes. This is not just the DNA of one person, he says, but it's the DNA of the parents and grandparents and grand-grandparents, great-grand-grand-grandparents, and so forth. So if we don't find sub-Saharan African ancestry in those people, that's pretty representative, at least for Middle Egypt. Krause hypothesizes that ancient North Egypt would be much the same, of course, if not more, linked to the Near East. But ancient Southern Egypt might be a different matter, however, where populations live closer to Nubia, home of the Black Pharaohs that's now in Sudan. And of course, he didn't say that. Someone else is trying to interject that, because this supposed Black Pharaohs of the 25th dynasty that everybody talks about was the Kushites, right? Well, the Kushites are Viceroys from Egypt, and they were all Caucasians. So you can look at their statues and stuff, and while they're made out of dark bronze and dark stone, it still shows you the Caucasian phenotype that doesn't exist in the others. And of course, West African previous primitives of the slave trade and stuff didn't know Egypt existed or anything like that, and that becomes a problem for them, because they've been touting this whole time that they were the ones somehow. One of the mummies analyzed as a part of the study in the human remains were discovered in the 1920s by a historian studying papyrus writing, says Krause. So they've done this whole thing with these mummies in ElMelek, but some of the ones that were into it were mummies that were in good shape too that they knew of, and did testing out of those, and they also followed suit, of course. The genetics of ElMelek community did not go any major shifts during the 1300-year time span we studied, said Wolfgang Hott, a group leader at the Max Planck Institute. What they were really expecting guys to hear and see, I guess, really, is a change of their genetics as they go through time. And of course, everybody said once the Persians and Akkadians and then the Greeks and Romans got in there, that's where you get this from, and that's da-da-da-da-da. And they go, well, there's blonde-haired and red-haired mummies with Caucasian phenotype all the way back. So this has been a confusion for some, others were extremely assured of what they were talking about. But what they were expecting to find here in the test was seeing the genetics change over time and being able to go, okay, well, here's the Persians, here's the Greeks, there's the Romans, here we go. But it didn't work out like that, for it's static. Blue-eyed Caucasians from the pre-dynastic all the way through. This period covered the rule of Alexander the Great and the Ptolemaic dynasties and the Roman rule. So strict social structures and legal incentives to marry along ethnic lines within these communities may have played a part in the Egyptians' genetic stasis. The paper speculates. Yep, they weren't playing that shit. A lot of people have assumed foreign invaders brought a lot of genetic ancestry into the region, Krause said. People expected through time Egypt would become more European. But we see the exact opposite. What? Yes, he's telling you here that they started out and they were Europeans. But over time, it changed. At the very end, what happened? Well, modern Egyptians were found to inherit 8% more ancestry from the African ancestors than the mummies studied. The paper cites increased mobility along the Nile, increased long-distance commerce, and the Arab to trans-Saharan slave trade as potential reasons why they might even show up some black DNA. The team's findings come with some obvious caveat, though. He says our genetic data was obtained from a single site in Middle Egypt, though, and it spans the time, so they're expecting, in the mummies they took, they knew they expanded the time, so this was supposed to cover it all. But he's saying that they may not be representative for all of Egypt. While the study might be limited in scope, the team believes it has made some technical breakthroughs. I expect there'll be a ton of ancient Egyptian mummies' genomes mapped in the next couple of years. And this is a couple of years ago, so we're expecting another paper to come out real soon. But also they're getting friction from some people for some reason. But Krause said that adding that multiple groups are following his team's lead. So in other words, it's not just going to be his team that did this and this one group thing right now as a project, but we're going to go with a large amount of groups doing it using the same technique. And there's a lot of mummies around the world in museums, and they can simply do this same type of procedure also, and we just start to get a real broad scope of what all went on. There's always more research we can do, and this is not the end, but just the beginning, he tells you. And that's the end of the story that's in that there. But, quite interesting. Let me know what you think down in the comments. But let me know why you thought that they might have more African ancestry. Is it because they're in a continent called Africa? Because Africa was named after Caucasians, and North Africa was always endemic Caucasians, and that's the reason it shows up like that. They have blonde and blue-eyed statues and mummies from way back in the pre-dynastic. Even Ginger, the pre-dynastic mummy, is a blonde-haired person. Every single mummy they've tested is Caucasian with Caucasian phenotypes, except for one, which was supposedly the fan-bearer of King Tut. King Tut's DNA shows to be in Europe, around Ireland and the UK there. For a reason, but oddly, whenever they tested it, the Max Planck guy that was in there said on a radio station when they were talking about all the stuff that he didn't want to give it all up now because they need a couple more tests and they don't want to be foiled later, but that the current haplogroup that King Tut has, are there other famous people, they ask him, that has that, and he goes, well, Tsar Nicholas from Russia for one. Before all that happened, and Anastasia and things like that. Yeah, Tartarian people and the ancient Tocharians, the blue-eyed people that helped out India more than once, the Sumerians, all the people of the Bible, of course, all around Mediterranean, and even Egypt. Always blue-eyed Caucasians. Here, let's look at that, and I can give you a little proof. Let's just go to one Google. Let's see if I got one open. Do I? No, really? Well, here's some of the earliest statues that they have of them, and they were of the earliest dynasties, and these aren't necessarily all the kings, but a lot of the scribes too, and the scribes were of course drawn with a regular look that kind of looked like themselves, whereas a king are always kind of given this global Photoshop kind of concept to them, and mullinated their looks a little bit and just kind of made them all look certain ways. But here's these crystal blue eyes in the statues, and you can see another look of this guy, see what he is. He's known as the sitting scribe, and they've now identified him pretty much because they've narrowed it down with all the other ones. They have many, many statues that have these crystal blue eyes that are made to look like real eyes that are staring you in the eyes. And they even did it to some cats way back in the first dynasties. And Hor-Ha, the second pharaoh ever, is shown here. And what this is showing you the fact that as you turn and go near them, they look a little gray, but as you get close and or in front of them, they turn blue, and they kind of follow you around the room. So it's pretty neat. But worse than that, there's a lot of blonde-haired and blue-eyed Egyptians. If we just look at King Tut's lineage, it comes from Akhenaten. Akhenaten's grandparents were Thuya and Uya, and you look at those, and they're two blonde-haired guys. He looks kind of like Abe Lincoln, and she looks like an English farm lady. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, and people have thought about, well, they draw them red ochre on the walls, and it's, well, red ochre and pale women, red ochre males, is shown in all the Caucasian art at the time. Men get tanned naturally, working in the sun and being farmers and the things and heralding civilization. And so even in the Greeks and Mitanni and Minoans and Etruscans, you know, those Greeks, and we all know what all those people really look like, but they're all drawn, and you can look at their art now and just see red ochre males and pale females. It's the same thing that's carried all the way through. You see a mummy and it's somewhat dark skinned, and they go, well, what's up with that? And whenever you take beef jerky and turn it into beef jerky, it turns extremely dark, and that's what happens. Bob Breyer, known as Mr. Mummy, was legally able to take a man who dedicated his body to science, and they mummified it all using the old techniques, natron, to the day, blah, 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 and all these things. Interestingly, he turned real dark like beef jerky, and you can look that up, Bob Breyer, Mr. Mummy, and it'll show it. It'll be one of the videos that show up, but he has quite a few of them. He's a famous Egyptologist, but you know, he hasn't been doing so much as late that's really in the spotlight that I've seen. There could be reasons for that too. But anyhow, yeah, cats even with green crystal eyes in some of them. So blue crystal eyes, green crystal eyes, and of course the Egyptian blue-eyed cat and stuff that they had bred. So it's quite interesting there. But also there's, let's just go over here a little more and show if we show some more real quick before we end this. My goodness, I've got too many things pulled up. So if we just go to Google and we look blue-eyed Egyptians, you can do this too. You're going to see that they're going to have a bunch of things about it. And Quora asks questions like, why, if they're black, do they have, and all this stuff. And you can see people asking leading questions. It's funny. Kind of. But you can see here Nefertiti, who's very famous, and they did the recreation of her recently, has a blue eye left in her, which is pretty much the color of the blue crown. So there's a white crown of Egypt, a blue crown that you see here, and then the red crown of Egypt. Red, white, and blue are the colors of Caucasians and all in their flags since forever, and that makes sense. So here's like 4th and 5th dynasty, Nofret and Rahotep, and he's drawn tan somewhat. Yep, pretty much that color, and then she's drawn real pale, and they both have blue eyes. There's the seated scribe right there. He's one of the famous ones. There's the Hor-Ha statue, a little more head on and blue eyes. Here's Mitri, another scribe. You can kind of make out her blue eyes that are there, but if we look right there, we can really make them out. And of course, there's no question about the phenotype here. Now this is Thuya and Uya. This is Thuya of Thuya and Uya, the great-grandparents of King Tut. And here's some pre-dynastic depictions of statues that they had with lapis lazuli inlaid blue eyes, and of course they've got Ginger, the pre-dynastic Egyptian mummy. This is what they think that King Tut looked like too, by the way. And interestingly, Egyptian blue. They have a lot of these old statues that really are faded and everything through time, but you can take an actinic light. It's that weird kind of like a black light, and it pops out the colors, and they can see, wow, they blew these statues of these eyes too, and so on. Pretty incredible, huh? But so you can see the blue crown type doyle that they had going on there. So they have a blue and then the famous red and white crowns of Egypt, and that shows actually who these people were in ancient times. And if you look up blue-eyed Egyptian scribes, you'll end up seeing a lot more of them. Let's just do that real quick. Just in the scribes. Well, this is Mitri, the first two, and then there's the seated scribe. This is Hor-Aha. This right here is known as Ka-Oper, and there have been people said that copper might even be named for that guy, but other people say it's Cyprus and Kyprus, and then you get copper out of that. Well, this guy's name is Ka-Oper. He also has blue eyes. Looks remarkably like my dad's facial structure. Of course, my dad had hair. Most of these people shave themselves fairly closely, and these are shown also through here. And there's a bunch more scribes. Look, this one that has blue eyes, and so on. Let's see if we can find a few more scribes that have blue eyes that are different ones through here, for there's a lot. Oh, another good thing to look at is to look up reserve heads, because they were reserve heads set for the ancient Egyptian pharaohs. And if you'll look through those, of course there's little pictures here or whatever, but if you look through those, you'll see phenotypes that are unmistakable too. Oh, and one other good thing, if we were to look up Hemwinu, Hemuinu, although they spell it a couple of different ways, you'll see the architect of the Great Pyramid, Hemwinu. And like I said before on the scribes, they show them looking pretty much normal as they did. And if you look, this guy's got kind of man boobs a little bit. And of course, when people sit down, they get this little scrunch going on. But he's a big old guy, over 6 foot, and you can tell his Greekish European phenotype here that's going on. And again, this is the statue of Hemwinu, the architect of the Great Pyramid. So I think we've pretty much satiated and did all that, and there's no interjections possible. So quite interesting there. Genetics proves again the truth of it all. I wonder how many years it'll be before they quit trying to claim it. Write down in the comments how many generations from now you think will start stopping to claiming the lie still. And we're going to go on to another interesting topic about ancient civilizations. There's a couple of good ones here. Ooh, Valkyries. Peace.